We've been losing our attention span. And in the year 2000, research shows that humans have about 12 seconds. We can hold our attention for about 12 seconds. That has been reduced to about 8 a decade later. Our attention spans are now shorter than goldfish and elephants and chimpanzees and so on and so forth. And that is problematic because it can hinder our creativity. We can only get creative when we have focused attention. All the times that we have thought outside the box, it was because we have maintained and sustained intense focused attention. So yes, rightly so, and if we lose 40% of our productivity to multitasking, then we risk becoming productive and creative, right? And then again, risk becoming very active in terms of our ability to engage in tasks. But that is even not the problem. The main problem is that we can become frustrated when we don't get our work done, and when we are behind schedule, and so we can have high levels of stress that can lead to anxiety and even depression, right? So it's important to focus and to sustain attention. And two of the psychological strategies that will help us do that is mindfulness and flow. They can help us to sustain our attention, focused, and become resilient, right? So that's just to provide a brief overview of the essence of these two thematic topics. So let's zoom into mindfulness. What's mindfulness? To be mindful, it's more like an everyday word, almost becoming a mundane. So mindfulness is essentially to maintain some awareness, right? To maintain awareness, to keep an attention on either our thoughts, our feelings, or the environment, right? And it's very intentional. So you want to get so much into a space where our focus is only on our thoughts and how we feel or things that surrounds us. And the way to do that is not to become judgmental, because again we have automatic thoughts. Some of them are about things that are not so helpful about ourselves, negative automatic thoughts. We are told that in a day we have about 60 to 60,000 automatic thoughts. Most of them within the unconscious, so we are not aware about them at all. But somehow they can influence our feelings and behavior. So a state where we become so aware about our thoughts and our feelings and the environment. And it's on purpose, because we want to experience it here and now. Here and now, this present moment. Why? Because our mind is very tricky. It's thinks about the past, the present, and of course the future. And philosophers will argue that that's also very debatable. And that's the beginning of some of our stress and problems. So if we speak with a patient someone who is very depressed, for instance, they are thinking about what has happened in the past or what's going to happen in the future, right? And that is causing some distress. But the problem is that they forget about now, the present. And philosophers will argue that there is no past. Can you walk into your past? So what is past? They will ask, for instance. And then you say, it's past is 1 second ago. Okay, so can you walk backwards 1 second ago? Then you ask, what's future? And they say, maybe 1 second ahead of us, the next second, 10 years, 5 years from now. Can you walk into that? And they will argue, for instance, that 5 years from now, it will just be here and now. It will just be the present moment that we see in the future. There's a whole discussion about that. But the problem is that because it's the genesis of most of our problems, people fail to recognize how they feel now, here and now, right? Which is very important. So mindfulness or strategies are just a set of guidelines to help us to recognize our present moment, right? And not being judgmental. Whether it's a good feeling, a bad feeling, a good thought, a bad one, it's not the case. The issue is to just feel yourself here and now. So there are three core elements. As I said, the first one is present moment awareness. Some people have difficulty thinking about how they feel here and now, and that's not helpful for them to have clarity of thoughts. Because to be able to be creative, you have to feel that you are yourself, the yin and the yang. There are negative aspects, there are positive aspects to life, and what is it for me now? The second is that when these thoughts and emotions come up, you don't have to be judgmental. The goal is not to judge them and to evaluate them, whether they are helpful or not. It's just the recognition and the appreciation and the awareness of them. So you may have a bad feeling about something. That's okay. Recognizing the feeling itself is enough, right? It's also a way to train the mind to stay engaged, because we've just seen that we are losing our attention span, and how can we stay engaged? Most of the time we are on autopilot. Most of the things we do, we don't really think about it, and rightly so, because if we have to think about it, that would be cognitive overload. Imagine you have to always think about brushing your teeth, bathing, the process involved, and everything that you do each day. That would be too overwhelming. So most of the time we are on autopilot. But we can't get things, as we say, think outside the box and become creative when it's this mundane autopilot. Sometimes we have to be focused and we require some attention. So essentially, that's mindfulness. What happens in the brain when we engage in mindfulness activities? First of all, there is an increased activity in the prefrontal cortex, which is important. And for most of the PPIs that we'll be talking about, they target specifically the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex, we know, is involved in what is described together as executive functioning. Our attention, the way we feel, and the way we take decisions, which is important. If we take these three out, we almost lose our humanity, right? That's not to say other parts of the functions of other parts of the brain are not important, but decision making, for instance, is key to our well-being, and that is what happens mostly during mindfulness activities and exercises. So you look at the brain scan here, you will see that. So this is the frontal lobe, which is more like the forehead, right? And we can see this is an individual who is not engaged in any activity, right? And on the left and on the right, the same individual engaged in meditation, which is a mindfulness activity. So here we find that there are some blood flow even whilst you are not engaged in any specific activity, right? Which is good, but compared with the one on the left, on the right, there is an increased amount of blood flow there. And just a small amount of blood flow in brain activity scans is huge. It shows that we can then become more focused in terms of attention, emotional regulation, and decision making. You can also see even the opposite side, quite some amount of blood flow baseline, but more during meditation, emphasizing that